Thanks so much for joining us on The Quiet Part Out Loud. I'm Nuvyn.
And I'm Alex.
And we are delighted to be here with Deborah Yedlin, President and CEO of the Calgary Chamber and former Chancellor of the University of Calgary. Welcome, Deborah.
Thanks for having me.
So we start off all of our guests with the same question. If someone made a movie about your life, what would it be called? And what are some interesting plot points you can share?
So I think if somebody made a movie about my life, it would probably be called A Random Walk because I never had a plan. Well, actually, I did have a plan, but my parents decided that that was not the plan that I was going to pursue. So my plan was to do a phys ed degree and then go study journalism and become a sports journalist. So I've always been a sports nut.
Yeah.
And my parents were like, no, you're not doing that. So I thought, okay, what's plan B? So plan B was study economics and English because I loved English and I thought economics would be practical. And then I just didn't know really where things were going to take me. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll go to med school. And that really didn't pan out. So I thought, okay, now what? Well, I think I'm going to try and work on Wall Street. So that worked out. And then after that, it was do an MBA, come back to Canada, maybe do investment banking for a little bit, but always in the back of my mind, I really want to write. And people who are writing business don't really know what they're writing about. You know, I had a unique background. I could write, never went to journalism school, and just kept on that path. But I wasn't, the plot line is I have this image in my head. I wasn't the easiest teenager. And I remember I was working at Goldman Sachs and I'd come home for a weekend or a few days to visit my parents. And I went to the Safeway because my mom said, can you pick up a few things at Safeway? And I went into Safeway and I ran into the woman who was the secretary at the junior high school that I went to in Edmonton and Laurier Heights Junior High. And she actually was the mother of a friend of my brother's. Brother's a bit older than me. Anyway, she looks at me and she says, Debbie, because that's what they called me then. And she says, what are you doing now? And I said, well, I'm working on Wall Street, working for Goldman Sachs. And she looked at me straight in the face and said, wow, we never thought you'd amount to anything.
No.
So that's the plot line. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I guess she'd be pretty surprised to see where I've gone since then.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the transition from Goldman Sachs to then finding and realizing your passion for writing and being a preeminent journalist, what surprised you the most in that transition?
Well, the pay. Let's start there. There was a big pay gap in terms of what I was making and then what the journalism world was paying. But I was amazed at how much feedback I would get from what I was writing and how people were appreciative of how I approached the subjects that I was writing about. And if somebody mentioned, well, I didn't quite understand what you were saying or writing about, I'd say that means I didn't do my job. So it was just always, it was a craft that I was continuing to hone. And I think I really never lost the passion for it. I mean, being on deadline is a grind and I still miss it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you've, shared and influenced so many perspectives over the years. From business, politics, our economy, our country. What keeps you up at night now?
Right now,
yeah,
in this moment, what keeps me up at night is where we are as a province, and the fact that they think that there is merit in breaking up the country, and so that does keep me up at night. It's we've always had these elements in Alberta. I grew up in Peter Lougheed's Alberta, and that was a time when we invested in so many things, in healthcare, in education, in infrastructure, and we all benefit today as Albertans from his vision from 40, 50 years ago. And there seems to have been a lost appreciation for what his vision was and how he also stood up for the country when we did have challenges with Ottawa. We resolved them and we moved on. And we need to take a page out of that book and move on because there's so much that we have as a province that we're better together as a country. And I'm really worried that people have lost the thread of why this country exists. Nothing's ever perfect, but whatever it is that people are aggrieved about. Yes, we had 10 years of terrible regulation, but we're moving forward. And I think we really need to pay attention to that.
You obviously have a very strong opinion that you share very publicly. which we appreciate. Thank you for being here. Have you ever felt uncomfortable sharing that opinion, or are there circumstances where you would maybe hold back or, change what you say?
Well, I would say that I have to live with myself. And if there's something I want to share, I know that perhaps the inside voice and the outside voice have to be a bit different. And as a youngster, I often would say things that just came to my mind and perhaps were a little unfiltered. And my father tacked something on the fridge, and it's from the Book of Solomon, Proverbs. And it says, if you watch your tongue, you'll save yourself from the troubles of the soul. So sometimes that informs what I'm about to say, but I really want to be, if there's something that I'm in a position to talk about that is important and that people need to hear, I will nuance what I have to say, because it's better to say something than stay quiet, because that means you're complicit in whatever's going on, and that's not okay.
We spent a lot of time on this podcast talking about the qualities of leadership and how those perhaps have evolved over time, or what makes a great leader. And I'm curious about your perspective as someone who interviews a lot of leaders. What qualities do you admire in leadership?
So I'm going to tell you a story. When Petro-Canada announced it was merging with Suncor, that one day my youngest son was sick. I didn't have childcare. I looked at Daniel and I said, guess what? You're coming with me. And so he came with me to the press conference. And halfway through the press conference, he's 10. He says, I have a question to ask Mr. George, Rick George, who was the president of Suncor. And I said, you have to wait. So he patiently waited. And after the press conference, I brought Daniel over to see Rick. And I said, my son, this is Daniel, and he has a question for you. And Rick bent down, knee height, looked at Daniel right in the eye and said, son, what's your question? Daniel asked him his question. He answered it. And I thought, that was someone who understood how connection was important. And I really think that, I often think back to that vignette, but we have to be compassionate. We have to be forward-thinking. We have to be agile. We have to have a broad perspective. It used to be that there was a very sort of siloed take. You were good at one thing, and it was just driving towards whatever the company needed at the time. But there's so many more pieces to leadership today, and you really are drawing on so many different aspects of who you are as a person. You have to be empathetic. You also have to understand change management, especially as you're going in the next 5 to 10 years. Your life changes every day. Like, who was using Claude 6 months ago? And it affects how we do things. And I really worry that the thoughtful part of leadership is, we're so pressed for time. You really need to have the time to think and reflect, to understand what's best for your organization, and also be able to laugh at yourself.
Yeah.
Because if you can't laugh at yourself, then The pace, you're not accessible. Not accessible.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. The pace in which we are operating and how decisions are made and the expectation is, sometimes I wonder if that's unsustainable.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I think it's, whether it's unsustainable or not, the reality is things are moving so fast, you will never have perfect information. So at what point do you feel like you've got enough that you can say, I'm going to make a decision. I don't know everything, but I'm prepared to stand by that decision because I need to move forward. And the other thing is oftentimes you have to bring your leadership team along with you who may not be comfortable with not having perfect information. And so it's how you communicate that vision. And I think one thing we've done, and I said this as a journalist, the ability to communicate is so critical, and more critical today than ever before. Whether you're a company, whether you're a leader of a company, doesn't matter. Communication is so important.
Totally agree. What types of communications do you think leaders should be having right now? What do we need to be talking about?
In terms of,
I believe in terms of communication, that transparency is very important. So, as a leader of a large or small organization, what do you think those conversations should be, whether it's trajectory of the organization, even future of Calgary or Alberta. What do you think leaders should be putting in the brains of their teams right now?
I think one of the first things they need to do is be contextualizing what you're doing and why, because what you have sort of sorted through in a thought process about direction of an organization, you've got all the pieces sorted out in your head, but not everybody's going to have those pieces. So you really do have to fill in the gaps for everyone and help them understand whatever the decision is, what the impact could be. Recognize that in some cases they may be uncomfortable because of where you're going and what it means for the organization, and it creates uncertainty. But we all have to live with a certain amount of uncertainty. There's nothing that's going to give us all that information. So the transparency, the accessibility, I feel as a CEO, it's, open door policy, come in and sit, talk, worry, whatever it is, happy to explain what's going on. But I think the more we communicate, the better we build trust within our organizations, within our leadership teams, within the community. And if, we often say that business moves at the speed of trust. You break that trust and then things start to fall apart.
That's so true. I think our country moves at the speed of trust too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think we're repairing that trust right now. I think from a Alberta, Canada perspective, I think the Prime Minister is working really hard to do that. I think there are still some people that are looking at the glasses being half empty. But when I consider where we are today versus where we were 12 months ago, it's a completely different place. And we've moved a lot further than we realize.
Yeah. What was one interview that really surprised you?
That's such a good question. I had so many great interviews.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had the opportunity to interview Mark Carney right after the financial crisis while he was Bank of Canada governor. Alan Greenspan. It's
so Mark Carney then.
Carney.
When you interviewed him, Mark Carney now, because you've also interviewed him.
Yeah.
What's changed?
He's still an Oilers fan.
He's dedicated, right?
Very dedicated. But, he is someone who's relatable and also very cerebral and driven and focused and understanding, from an economic standpoint, really what's important. So none of that, what you see is what you get.
Yeah.
He hasn't changed much in the however many years it's been since 2008.
Right.
Has anyone ever been a really good interviewee that you didn't expect, or the opposite, that you thought was going to be the best interview and it was just fell flat?
I never went in with any expectations.
Oh.
Yeah. My expectations were, this is the information I need and I better the hell get it.
Right.
So I'm just trying to think. There's just so many people that I've interviewed
going
over the
in
years.
without any expectations and seeing where the conversation goes is probably the right approach. I remember that you shared a story with me years ago that really that's stuck with me, and I remember it, and I'm trying to recollect the specifics and the details, but I think you were either a new journalist or you were asked by your editor, Deborah, what do you think the purpose of journalism is?
So I was actually interviewing at the Herald, 7 months pregnant with my second child, with Crosby Cotton, who was the editor at the time. And he had a very gruff voice, and he said to me, yeah, but what's the purpose of journalism? And I said, to educate and to inform. And he said, no, to sell newspapers.
Right.
And, I took I held that view that it was to educate and to inform.
Yes.
He still wanted to sell newspapers, fine. Whatever. As long as you have good journalism, you can sell newspapers. And I think that's the one thing that we've forgotten. Good newspapers, good content actually speak for themselves, and people do look for that.
Right.
And so that's why the Financial Times is the Financial Times, New York Times, Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.
Good content, people look for. Globe and Mail, yeah.
But then the challenge now is that people will put anything out in the name of, that people have a hard time distinguishing
And
whether
it's seen
it's
as
actually
truth.
Yeah. There's no editors in the blogosphere, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what's really challenging. That's why, it's interesting that you have mediums like Substack and The Line and others that curate the content, have people write for them, in the case of The Line. And you still need that critical thinking to sort of assess what it is you're consuming
Mm-hmm.
in terms of that content. And it's just getting more crowded, more complicated. And you really have to work hard to figure out what's real, what's not, what's relevant, what's not, and what's backed up with facts
Scary.
or just opinion.
Because any influencer can spew stuff, whatever perspective or product or, miracle supplement that they want, and people fall for it.
They do. I mean, think about the whole autism and the vaccinations.
Right.
Yeah.
I
And the
thought
harm.
autism was caused by Tylenol.
Well, and somebody else thought it was caused by the MMR vaccines, right?
Right.
And some people just decide that that's what they're going to believe.
Right.
And when you try and harm somebody or affect somebody's belief system, that's also hard.
Right. Nothing a little ivermectin can't cure.
Oh, yes. Well,
Right?
ask a horse.
We've seen that.
Of course. Yeah.
Right. When you think about the state of journalism today and the threat that it is under from, whether it's social media, how people receive content, investigation for truth, facts versus fiction versus fake news, how does someone like you who's built their career in this sector manage that? How do you cope with it?
First, you have to despair, which is where we all are as journalists or former journalists. But I think it's hard to reckon with. And I think a lot of people start to look for other areas where they can curate, and that's a problem, but they can curate content that they feel speaks to them. And that is unfortunate because it takes you into the confirmation bias world. And so what we've lost is a few things. One is, I still get 3 newspapers delivered to my house every day. And
Hard
then
copy.
Hard copy and the New York Times on the weekends.
Yeah.
That process of reading the newspaper is an associative process because you go in looking at the headline story on the front page, but then your eye catches other stories and you expand your horizon by doing that. When you read online, the algorithm does tell you where to go based on history, based on that first click. And so you don't have that associative experience and you don't have that, inadvertent broadening of your perspective. And that's what's really, really frustrating. But I think think about this. When we were all young and our newspapers were delivered or we had the TV on at night, everybody started from the same place in terms of the information we had. It was all basic facts, basic information. That's not the case anymore. And so you can find the information you want wherever you want. And that takes us into these different places where then you look for your confirmation bias wherever you decide to go online. And that actually fundamentally undermines our democracy and our ability to have a civil conversation.
Right. And then I think the impact of AI as well is just going to exacerbate that.
Yeah. No, I think, and that's why what really worries me is this lack of understanding. I think the younger generation and also people who perhaps don't have time, critical thinking skills, the ability to ask questions. If you want to sort of train the AI and the large language models, you have to be able to ask the right questions. And so I go back to, I have a BA. I call it my Be Anything degree, but I learned how to, analyze, synthesize, communicate. And that's what we need now more than ever. You need that critical thinking. And so go get your engineering degree and maybe take a few philosophy courses along the way because we need to have that you need a broader background than ever. And that critical thinking, absolutely, it's as far as I'm concerned, it's not negotiable.
You brought that perspective as chancellor at the University of Calgary, and I had the great fortune of working with you because I was at the UOC when you were our chancellor. And what did you enjoy most about that experience? I mean, being on a campus around these students, these bright, hopeful minds.
Yeah, it was energizing to be with the students, to talk to the faculty members, to talk, take time to spend with the deans to understand what they wanted, what their visions were for their various faculties, and the impact I could see that the university was having on the city, and the excitement around the startup community that has just gone on to grow exponentially since. There was just so much. It was the art of possibility, right? It was just what was possible on that campus, and a lot of nostalgia too.
Right.
Thinking back to my time when I was an undergrad and how the world was in front of me, and you see these kids with the same expectations and the same hopes, and
I remember like convocation. And convocation at a university when you're on the executive team is exhausting because you have to go to, I didn't go to all of them. You kind of like, I'll go to this one, you go to that one. But the chancellor has to go to all of them.
And stand
And shake hands and say congratulations and offer those, words of congratulations.
Yeah.
And you did it with such poise and elegance, I remember.
I had quite the running shoe collection by the time it
Right?
was
Oh, yeah, I
over.
bet.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it was just so great to see these, all the students just crossing the stage. Some of them just determined to do it as fast as possible, and the other ones sauntering. Some of them dancing.
Yeah.
The fine arts students. It was a great. It was so uplifting.
It's a very emotional time on campus.
Yeah.
And then you see the families that are there. Everyone should go to a university convocation at some point.
I agree. It's just because I think if you are despairing about where the world's going, you see what these young folks are thinking, doing, what they've done. They always highlight a few of the graduates before the ceremony actually starts in terms of the other things that they do in addition to their studies. And it fills you with a sense that all is not lost. It's we will move forward and we will get through whatever tough times are ahead.
And to bring that emotion into a larger scale, what gives you hope for like Calgary's future or even Canada's future? What are you hopeful for?
Well, I'm hopeful that the country stays together, for one. And I really think that we have to recognize that this is a really great place to be. And there's another story, and it ties back to the university and to Dick Haskayne, who tells a story, and it's in his book, Northern Tigers, about a banker coming to visit him from Switzerland. And the banker saying, he says, "How are things, Mr. Haskayne?" And he says, "Well, this is not good, and that's not great, and interest rates are wherever they are." And the banker stops him halfway through and says, "Mr. Haskayne, this is a great country. You're a country in search of a problem." And
Wow.
I keep thinking about that, and so I'm hopeful that we actually do get through this political tension and move forward, because I think this is a country that has what the world needs. This province is the energy capital of the country. We have an agreement and a memorandum of understanding with Ottawa. And I do think we can move forward with what has been established. And I think there'll be more change. I don't think what's on the table now is great, but I think things will continue to evolve as the world evolves, because we have to be responsive to the changing geopolitical environment. We need to make sure that we can attract capital. And I think that's something that's absolutely critical if we're going to realize our ambitions. And that's another reason why we need to stay together and deal with the political uncertainty. So, broadly speaking, lots of opportunity. And when it comes to Calgary, I think we still don't tell our story very well. There's so much that goes on here from an innovation standpoint, from a population, youngest STEM-educated population in the country. And then the University of Calgary, that generates more startups than any other U15 university in the country. That tells you that entrepreneurial spirit, that sort of problem-solving mindset, that willingness to take risk, which I would say that's one thing that we don't see as much of, broadly speaking, across the country. We are risk takers, we're dreamers, we're entrepreneurs, and people come to Calgary because they know they're one phone call away from getting in touch with someone they want to talk to about an idea, about a job. You can't do that in Toronto. Can't do that in Vancouver. But you can do it here.
Yeah, it's very special.
It is.
And now, as president and CEO of the Chamber, what role can the Chamber play in facilitating that discussion, in ensuring that we're telling our stories in ways that connect with people?
Well, we obviously do it through our events.
Yeah.
Anytime we have an event, there's always a story that goes along with it. And there's a reason why we have the events that we do hold. But also we have a platform within the Chamber community, and we have something called the Global Cities Coalition, which is the big city chambers across the country. And so we have that opportunity as well to talk about what's going on in Calgary. And we work together to make sure that we each leverage whatever others, what others need or want or would like to hear about. And so we just need to tell that story better across the country. And much like the energy sector hasn't done a good job of it, neither have we.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned Mr. Haskayne, because when I had just moved to Calgary, he was one of the first meetings I had. And he was so humble and talked about his family and his dad, who was a butcher,
Yes.
like feeding the town during the Depression
Yes.
and growing up in Gleason. And I wonder if, we sometimes lose that sense of community and that connection to our roots. And as a result, either take for granted the sheer benefits and a vibrancy that actually Calgary has to offer.
And I think you're right. And part of the challenge is that the COVID experience drove so many people inward and to social media platforms, to their homes. And, God knows it, God forbid it happens again. But that feeling of community that we've had in the city it's there. I think and I do believe that it's we can surface it again.
Yeah.
Certainly, the Olympics 1988 really brought everybody together. The flood in 2013, you saw people helping everybody across all over the city. And so I think we are a city that shows up for one another.
Yeah.
And I do believe that. And Nuvyn, you and I, the Cancer Center campaign.
Yeah.
Calgarians supported that campaign. And it's now the second largest cancer center in North America. Right. So when there's a need, everybody comes together and everybody comes forward to support the community in a way that's relevant and important.
Yeah. I think we're building digital communities where physical communities used to be. And so, organizations like Access and the Chamber, I think we notice specifically that there is this thirst for in-person connection. I don't know if you've experienced that as well.
I was actually reflecting on that yesterday. The Chamber held the first in-person event after all the restrictions came off in March of 2022. And it was, we were looking at all this data and thinking, are they going to actually lift them? Are they not? We'd sold it out. It was an energy event, energy summit. And, we were able to go ahead with it, but everybody was so happy to see one another. And it's just built from there because that connection. How do you build community? How do you build a business? You need to see people and you need to talk to them and you need to understand what they're doing and where you fit in and how you can help them and what else is going on in the city. Otherwise, you don't really get the full sense of what's possible.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we are in a city where anything is possible.
Yes, we are.
Well, thank you for spearheading that possibility for us and so many Calgarians. I think your leadership at the Chamber and your commitment to our community is felt, and you have incredible impact in every room that you walk into. So it's a pleasure to be here with you today, and thank you so much for joining us on another episode of The Quiet Part Out Loud. The Quiet Part Out Loud is produced by Access Connects and brought to you by Oh wait, is there a sponsorship opportunity there? Learn more at accessconnects.com.